If you have been online in the last decade, you have undoubtedly heard the terms alpha male, beta male, sigma male, but there's way more to it than that. This is a model of human hierarchy, specifically male social sexual hierarchies, that discuss not merely just relative status, but people's relational behaviors. This comes from Vox Day. He's a writer, he has some really interesting books, and he has broken down the way that males interact with each other into about 5 or 6 categories. So let's go through these really quick, and then at the end of the video, I'll tell you why this is important to know. So if you don't know who I am, by the way, my name is Nick. I write about men's transformation. I help men find clarity in their goals, discipline, and just build personal power. So if that's something you're into, make sure to subscribe and let's get into this. So the first type is the alpha. Now, alphas are actually few and far between. They are natural leaders, natural decision makers. They're highly attuned to hierarchical systems, right? They just kind of have a natural understanding of what's going on in human interaction. They're often very big picture oriented, and a lot of guys, they think they want to be an alpha, but the reality is there's a lot of pressure that comes along with it. You have to be on all the time, right? You cannot sleep, you cannot slip. And women too, right? Women say that think they want the alpha male. In reality, most women could not handle an alpha male because an alpha is not going to pay a bunch of attention to his wife. It's just kind of how it goes. So these are like the top dogs of the hierarchy. Now below them, or directly below them, are the bravos. Bravos are like the first lieutenants to the alpha. They're the operational managers of the hierarchy. Their basic function is to put a check on deltas and gammas and basically act as a mediator between the alpha, passing down orders and organizing things with everybody else. Now these people are often highly conscientious. They're very big team players. They're detail oriented. But they probably don't have that natural leadership ability, or rather the decision-making ability. If they're thrown into a situation where they are solely responsible for everything, then they tend to get a little bit overwhelmed. And they don't really have that intuitive sense for all the status jockeying going on around them. Below them, and this is the most common type of man. This is kind of like the bug man, so to speak. These are deltas. They are workhorses. They are defenders of the rules and the social hierarchy. Now, these people tend to over-explain. They tend to compensate for the fact that they're kind of third-tier men. These are really like, they can be A players. Oftentimes they're B players. But their status is kind of pedestrian, right? These are worker bees. Now, they have an easy life, quite honestly, because they get along well in the social hierarchy. Right? And they have the time to pursue hobbies outside of work and outside of status jockeying. They're not really too concerned about rising in the social hierarchy. So they tend to do okay. They're just kind of annoying if you are a sigma, right? You kind of see these people and you're like, they're kind of lifeless, right? They're just kind of, like I said, the drones, the worker bees, the bugmen. So they look up to the alpha and the bravo. And they tend to despise the sigma who is outside and doesn't really care about the social hierarchy. Now, underneath them are gammas. Gammas are embittered losers. These people are book smart, of course, but often socially defeated. They have an overestimated or an overinflated sense of their own importance, right? They always think that they're destined for greatness, that they deserve to be in the leadership role. However, they fail to take responsibility for everything. They're constantly passing the buck, right? They think they deserve the credit for the good things, and anything bad that happens is somebody else's fault. So these people are highly untrustworthy, highly manipulative as well. They will often either play the victim or pretend to be an ally in order to gain favor and try to weasel their way into female attention, so to speak. And unfortunately, we live in a situation where the social hierarchies have kind of become larger. The arena has gotten bigger thanks to globalization. And you have social media, which tends to validate people's egos. So it's led to this widespread gamification of society. And this is really what you see. Think about somebody who's arguing on Reddit all day. This is, or Quora or whatever. Websites like this that really prioritize ranking opinions, things like this. This is typical gamma behavior. Underneath them are omegas. Now, omegas are just neats. They've given up. They are lying flat. They have very little ambition. They don't even really desire, they've kind of given up any desire to either work within the social hierarchy, rise up in the social hierarchy. These are just people who kind of wasting space in some ways. You know, these are people who kind of live with their parents. They're not really focused on growth. They're not really focused on improving themselves. They just don't care. That's fine, I guess. We also have Lambdas. Now, Lambdas are gay, more or less. These are guys that are outside of the sexual hierarchy, right? They have placed themselves comfortably for themselves outside of the sexual competition for women. So they're kind of off to the side, right? They might do well in workplace environments, but they're not trying to swoop girls, essentially. And lastly, we have Sigma males. Now, these are guys who are confident in their own skin, but simply don't care about hierarchies. They're highly independent, oftentimes creative, but they, like I said, they don't really care about other people's opinions. They like to live by their own rules as much as possible. And like I said, they're ambitious, but they're not really trying to be on top of other people. They don't really want to manage other people. They don't want to have to deal with the petty status jockeying. They're just kind of go their own way in a sort of positive sense. Now, these people may struggle because we all kind of operate within a status hierarchy, a social hierarchy. So they might struggle within that. They might either get bored or they just kind of run afoul of the bravos and the deltas, the people who really do care about the social hierarchy. And but because they're not as die-hard trying to prove themselves to everybody at every single instance, they're not nearly as malignant as gammas. So again, these kind of describe men's natural tendencies. They're kind of natural behavioral tendencies. Now, some people might say this is fixed, right? A leopard doesn't change his spots. More likely than not, you can kind of shift to an adjacent position. And also, we often play these roles situationally. Like you might have somebody who's naturally a delta, but then they become a swing dance instructor or something like that. And within that classroom swing dance setting, they are the alpha. So it's very situational and also very, it's localized and universal at the same time in terms of what somebody's natural inclinations are and what their specific role in a specific situation is. Now, it's important to understand this for a few reasons. Now, first and foremost, we can learn to identify our own natural tendencies, and we can learn to identify the natural tendencies of other people, thereby reducing friction, right? Because whenever you know somebody is a gamma, or if you know they are a delta, you will quit trying to pretend like they're something else, and you'll quit expecting them to act in a way that they don't naturally act. And, if you know somebody's a gamma, you can simply steer clear of them. You don't have to associate with people who are gammas and omegas. In fact, it's probably in your own best interest not to, right? Don't feed them your energy. Secondly, we can identify how to best act in various roles. If you know what these roles are, then you can best operate in specific situations where you are cast in a certain role. Sometimes you might have to play the delta. Sometimes you might have to play the bravo or the alpha. If you know what this entails, you can simply do it better. This will serve you in the long run. And finally, we can learn to maximize or compensate for our natural inclinations. So if you are naturally a bravo, you can be like, okay, I get this. I understand why I like the things that I like. Now I can maximize those things. I can be the best bravo in the world. Or if you are naturally an argumentative cunt, if you are kind of a gamma, you can mitigate that. You can recognize that this is not going to serve you over the long run, and you can behave a little bit more like a sigma or a little bit more like a team player delta and possibly have a better life. And just as a final aside, this kind of helps us understand why society is so kind of screwed up, right? Because we live in a society where alphas don't often get promoted to the leading position. I mean, Donald Trump is kind of an exception, but somebody like J.D. Vance, kind of a delta, right? But otherwise, we are kind of ruled over by lambdas and gammas and women. And it kind of explains why society is the way it is. Because you have a situation where the leading figures are not naturally very good at leading. They don't really understand themselves and what's going on in the world. So this just kind of helps us understand a bit more about the world so that we can more effectively navigate things. Now, if you enjoyed this video, I would highly recommend subscribing to my Substack, where I talk about social dynamics, personal power, those sorts of topics, so that you can transform your life and become a better man.